The lock and key, the distinguishing device of civilization and enlightenment. That's not a compliment to mankind, and it wasn't meant to be. Come to Ambrose Bierce's Devil's Dictionary. If you haven't met it, it's a delightfully amusing book. We take for granted using a lock and key without a second thought. But how far back do locks go? The people of Sumeria, the land we now call Iraq, invented the lock and key about 4 millennia ago. It's called the Egyptian lock because it was first described in modern times from a picture on the wall of one of the great temples at Karnak. It has a wooden bar locked by wooden pegs and operated by usually a wooden key looking like a giant toothbrush. Bear that concept in mind because we'll come back to it. The keys are quite large. In fact, typically they're carried on the shoulder. There's a modern, or fairly modern, Egyptian, probably beginning of the 19th century, carrying wooden keys on his shoulder. That's the first principle of security of mechanical key locks, movable detainers. But after the Romans, to the late 18th century, lock-making declined technically, relying on the other principle, fixed obstructions, called wards. Then, as now, most locks in use were of very modest quality and security. But there were some splendid examples of art metalwork made. This one's called the Cavalier lock. About a score of them were made by Birmingham locksmith John Wilkes towards the end of the 17th century. It has some puzzle features, one being how to find the keyhole. It's also a counting lock, so there's no possibility of surreptitiously opening it without the master knowing. There's a dial that shows how many times it's been opened. A very secure lock too, as well as being an expensive one. It has a doggerel verse on most of them saying, "If I had the gift of tongue, I would declare and do no wrong. Who ye are that come by stealth to impair my master's wealth." Because it certainly was possible to open warded locks without the key, and this was recorded on a West Country gravestone in the 16th century. A zealous locksmith died of late, and did arrive at heaven gate. He stood without, and would not knock, because he meant to pick the lock. I can't yet tell you if he succeeded. Joseph Bramah was a Yorkshire joiner who moved to London in 1780. That is, the city of London, the square mile. He couldn't afford to live in London, so he took lodgings 2 miles outside London in the little country village of Islington. Whilst working in London houses, though, Bramah became aware of the scale of burglaries, many of them inside jobs. And even without the help of servants inside, leaving a door unlocked, burglars could easily open them with skeleton keys. Bramah invented a lock in 1784, which was too difficult and expensive to make by hand. So machines were created to make the lock commercially, and this lock was a milestone in the development of precision engineering mass production that we today take for granted. Bramah had many other inventions, He also invented the cylinder locking device concept, which he didn't patent, and also the lock-picking challenge. The cylinder locking device idea meant that a small key could operate a large bolt or any sort of bolt, a great variety of different lock functions, all with the same key. His lock-picking challenge appeared shortly before 1800, and there it is on a board on display in Bramah's showroom window. The lock at the top is the challenge lock. It's a padlock of about 4 inches diameter, and the challenge says, "The artist who can make an instrument that will pick or open this lock shall receive 200 guineas the moment it is produced." It doesn't actually say anything about proving that it works. And then a few more words were added later on across the middle, though I doubt they were very effective. Small boys had the habit of flinging open the door, shouting, "Can I pick your lock, mister?" before running away. So it was added to say, "Applications in writing only." The challenge padlock was a complicated lock with 18 sliders. It was one of only 3 known to have been made with 18 sliders. Bramah also published some crime prevention advice, which is still valid today. Prevention is better than punishment. We'd express it rather more succinctly than Bramah. The naval dockyards, after the Napoleonic Wars, were stuffed with equipment just as valuable and useful to merchant seamen as to the Royal Navy, and the scale of pilfering from the naval dockyards was so serious that the government was moved to offer a £100 prize for a secure, physically robust lock that was easy and inexpensive to make. The perfect lock, in other words. And the prize was won in 1818 by a ship's chandler and brass founder from just along the coast named Chubb. And what he produced was the first successful lever lock with a detector. That's the basic lever lock. It had been invented just a few years before the Bramah lock. But Chubb added to it a detector which meant that the lock not only recognized its own correct key, it also recognized an incorrect key or a picking attempt, and it signaled this by change of state. The lock jammed and it wouldn't immediately open when the true key was used. The key holder had to do something else to it first to restore it to normal functioning. Chubb, having received the government prize, then offered a lock-picking challenge of his own. His £100 prize money to anybody who could pick his lock. And the government offered to add a prize to that. If the successful person to pick it happened to be a criminal, the government offered a free pardon and get out of jail free. And that actually saved taxpayers money, but was immensely valuable to any successful convict. And there were in Portsmouth Dockyard prison hulks full of prisoners awaiting transportation to Australia, and among them there was an ex-locksmith, and he took on the challenge. He was offered any tools he asked for and taken ashore under guard to try to pick the Bramah lock. He was even given another specimen to examine. He tried. He really tried. He finally gave up after 13 weeks. Failure. So by the mid-19th century, the names of Bramah and Chubb were both well-known names of lockmakers, and this poem appeared anonymously in a popular magazine in 1840. I met a cracksman coming down the Strand who said, "A huge cathedral piled of stone stands in a churchyard near St. Martin's le Grand, where keeps St. Paul his sacerdotal throne. A street runs by it to the northward, and there for cab and bus is writ, no thoroughfare. The mayor and councilmen do so command." And in that shop, a shop with many a box, upon whose sign these fateful words I scanned: "My name is Chubb, who makes the patent locks. Look on my works, ye burglars, and despair." Here made he pause and sighed with drooping air, like one that sees a blight crush all his hopes. "Our game is up, my covies, blow me tight." And so on to the Great Exhibition of 1851. Alfred Hobbs came over from New York, representing the American lockmaking company of Day and Newell. In America, he'd been advertising his company's products by demonstrating that his rivals' products were insecure. And he did just that in Britain. He was accepting many challenges. One of them was a challenge to open a Chubb strongroom lock, which he did in just 25 minutes, without any noise or damage, and this caused consternation in the business community. How could businesses protect their assets if the best locks that we could make could be so seemingly easily defeated? And then Hobbs turned to the Bramah lock, and he opened that in a total of 52 hours spread over 16 days. He kept a meticulous log of his progress. Messrs. Bramah protested. The lock must have been damaged, but the custodian of the key on the held the key, opened the package and applied it to the lock, and it worked perfectly. The challenge said, "an instrument." Mr. Hobbs has used several instruments. But the committee unanimously subscribed a letter saying Mr. Hobbs has fairly picked or opened the lock, and Messrs. Bramah should now pay up. And so it was that the next day a new exhibit appeared on the Day and Newell stand in the American Pavilion. There's the Chubb lock that Hobbs picked, and the new exhibit that attracted so much attention was laid out on a piece of black velvet, 200 gold sovereigns. Hobbs did indeed prove that the Bramah lock is pickable, but he also showed how difficult it was, and there hasn't been a queue of locksmiths queuing up to emulate him. Today, it's still one of the most secure locks you can buy for your door, and even the locksmiths who are particularly concerned about non-destructive entry admit that practically the only way into a Bramah lock is by the application of force. Although these same locksmiths are regularly picking the sort of lever locks that are regarded as secure. Not that they're trivial by any means, they certainly are not, but they are easier to open today with great advances in equipment and training. The Bramah lock, incidentally, which is still in production, is one of the very few locks authorized by the government and approved for use on securing explosive magazines. This curiosity was also exhibited at the Great Exhibition. It's the Aubin Lock Trophy. Charles Aubin was one of the greatest locksmith craftsmen of the 19th century, and he made this history of locks from early times up to the pinnacle of the big Bramah lock at the top. Every lock has its own key that will lock and unlock it, but they can all also be simultaneously locked and unlocked by turning that big Bramah key at the top. Hobbs bought this at the end of the Great Exhibition, and it stayed in the Hobbs Lock Company until the company was taken over by Chubb in 1956. There were wags who said that the owner of the Chubb Company had bought the Hobbs Company in order to acquire possession of the Aubin Lock Trophy. They say there's many a true word spoken in jest. I couldn't possibly comment. And so on to another famous name in lockmaking. The Linus Yales, father and son, had worked on various pin tumbler locks through a succession of experimental models, and Yale eventually formed his last company with the engineer Henry Town as his partner, and they produced a lock. I say they, actually Yale never saw his lock as a commercial success because he died suddenly on Christmas Day just before production was due to start at the beginning of the following year. So the company was actually run by Town, who was a driving force in industrial design and technology, industrial education, and he ran a very vigorous Yale Lock Company that took over many of its rivals and often added their products to the Yale product line. Here's the principle of the Yale lock. There's a revolving plug at the bottom there in a fixed cylinder, and a pin stack which consists of a bottom pin and a top pin or driver pressed by a spring, and it bridges the gap between the plug and the cylinder, so the plug can't turn. But put in the correct key and it lifts the pin to just the right height to bring the division between the bottom pin and the top pin to coincide with the division between the plug and the cylinder, and then the plug can turn. And there's not just one, there's several, typically 5. Most of our doors have 5 pins, and there's the key going in. It lifts all the pins to the correct height so the plug can turn. If it's the wrong key, it'll lift them to different heights that are wrong, and it only needs one pin to be just slightly too high or too low and the lock won't open. And the Yales also adopted the cylinder lock principle invented by Bramah, so you can have very many different functions of Yale lock, all operated by the same key. If you wish, literally the same key, not just the same type of key. And Yale now make locks of every kind, so the name Yale isn't a generic term for any particular type of lock. It can only be applied to products of the Yale Lock Company and not to any similar products of other companies. This basic design is susceptible of quite advanced development. Here's one. It's a huge amount of machining and precision engineering gone into that. And this one not only has moving pins, it also has magnets. So it's necessary for the key to have the right sort of magnets in the right places. The Victorians almost invented privacy. There was a proliferation of lock types in the Victorian era, from account books to whisky bottles, even the billiard cues. There were locks for everything. And we're still at it. This rather cheeky advertising promotion persuaded people to shell out £30 for what is basically an advertisement for Ben and Jerry. If you don't trust your flatmates not to steal your ice cream, you can put one of these on it. And there's a sentence on the locking ring that says, "I'm sorry, but there's no U in my pint." Most locks in use throughout this century, or last century, have been of very modest quality and security as ever. At the beginning of the 20th century, despite many more modern inventions, many of the locks in use were still warded locks. Skeleton keys aren't magic things. They only work on warded locks, and they only fit a lock of a particular size and type, so several different sizes are needed. Houdini toured Britain early in the 20th century, and he reckoned that fewer than a dozen skeleton keys would suffice to open most of Britain's front doors, and he was probably right. He also played Germany, and having a successful escape challenge with the German police. While he was in Germany, a notorious international travelling burglar who specialised in burgling churches was arrested after murdering a policeman. Houdini happened to be in the police headquarters the day after the arrest and spoke to the man. After the criminal's execution, he was given one of the burglar's lockpicks, this unusual adjustable skeleton key. In 1940, the Germans decided they would put all the troublesome POWs with a habit of escaping into one secure camp, and for this they chose a spare medieval castle in East Germany, in the little town of Colditz. The castle still had its old warded locks, and the prisoners soon had the run of the castle. That made even easier after a German guard lost one of their bunches of keys that they used for searching the castle. In fact, the commandant was so exercised by this loss and the guard's inability to find the lost bunch of keys that he eventually had to appeal to the prisoners to help find them. The prisoners indeed were more successful at finding the lost keys than the German guards. Clearly, the old locks were not up to the job, and a brand new type of lock was installed. This had only been invented by the icecream company in 1939. They're best known for their optical instruments, binoculars and so on, but they did also make some machine products. And this one was based on an early prototype by Linus Yale with 4 rows of pins instead of just 1, and it's called the cruciform lock. It's not common in Britain, but it is popular in the Far East and South America. A Dutch naval officer, Captain van Doornik, was a watchmaker, and he designed and made, in Colditz, a device for picking and decoding cruciform locks. There's a photograph of it taken by the camp security officer, and that was given to an author long after the war. I'm afraid it's the only picture available, and it's a rather poor one at that, but the only one. Van Doornik was able to make keys for all the new locks, and the prisoners soon had the run of the castle again. If today you lose your car key, The tool the locksmith will use to unlock your car is designed by a genial Chinese gentleman named Mr. Li Shi. But you heard the idea first in Colditz. Another escape-prone prisoner was Second Lieutenant Desmond Llewellyn. In Colditz, he would have encountered some of the escape gadgets supplied by MI9, possibly including a handy set of lockpicks inspired by this Houdini set. This is the inspiration for a popular version nowadays used as an emergency pick set by locksmiths. And when in his later career as a professional actor, Llewellyn was cast as James Bond's quartermaster Q, he would have known that the Bond gadgets in the films were not all cinema fantasy. Here's one I made earlier. Another former Colditz POW was Lieutenant, afterwards Brigadier, Jock Hamilton Bailey. And he visited Colditz in old age. He was 83, went with his son. Colditz Castle has become a tourist attraction since the reunification of Germany. And the young East German guide was embarrassed to have to say sorry that she couldn't take the tourists into one of the rooms because she didn't have a key. The elderly former prisoner produced one he'd made earlier, and it still worked. Keys played a key part in some other wartime stories. Oswald Job was a German spy who arrived in Britain posing as a refugee. All unauthorized arrivals in Britain were examined on arrival in a reception centre nicknamed the London Cage. One question which bothered his interrogator was why an escaping refugee who had only what he stood up in, why should he take such care to bring with him a bunch of keys, ordinary cabinet keys? He seemed very attached to them. Examination by a locksmith showed that they actually contained invisible ink and materials for secret writing. He had a very short spying career which ended in Wandsworth Prison. Another German spy, codenamed Cicero, had more success with his duplicate key in the residence of the British ambassador in Turkey. The ambassador habitually took secret documents home to read at leisure in the evening. But first, he relaxed in his bath. Whilst the ambassador was in his bath, his valet was busy photographing the documents in the ambassador's red dispatch box. He then sold the rolls of film to the Germans, and Cicero only discovered after the war that the Germans had paid him in counterfeit money. British codebreakers were quickly aware of the existence of Cicero and thereafter ensured that the ambassador was only sent documents that we wished the Germans to see. There's hardly any product that some man can't make a little worse and sell a little cheaper. Of course, lockmakers knew this, but they operate in a market, and no company stays in business long if it makes products customers won't pay money to buy. Lockmakers could and did make better door locks, but sales were few. Until the weakness of the locks was exposed publicly in the early 1950s, and the insurance industry and all the security industry, lockmakers and so on, came together with the British Standards Institute to publish British Standard 3621 of 1962, specification for thief-resistant locks for hinged doors. Lockmakers now had a market for secure locks, with encouragement from insurers, police crime prevention officers, neighbourhood watch, and the Home Office crime prevention campaigns. Who remembers this magpie? Don't let them get away with it. And the magpie was reused again for a Surrey police anti-burglary campaign much more recently. This era of secure lever locks from the 60s lasted till the end of the 20th century, and then the growing fashion for plastic doors, locked by an insecure version of the Yale-type cylinder lock, led to a decline in our door security. So if you have a wooden door, do keep it and put a good lever lock in it. Only 2 companies exhibited in the Great Exhibition of 1851 and the Festival of Britain in 1951, and they were Bramah and Chubb. And despite advances in electronic locks, mechanical key locks will be around for the foreseeable future. So let me finish with some unusually large locks. In 1921, Chubb had an order for a master key suite from the Maharajah of Patalia, and the largest of them, these 4-inch padlocks, were for the elephant house. Elephants were very important to the Maharaja, and so the ones supplied to the Maharaja were all silver-plated. He had a very small key that fitted on his finger ring. Chubb made some extra ones to keep for display, and these were on display in Chubb's London showroom for many years, and so they were quite well known. And curiously, one of the original Elephant House padlocks was put on sale by an owner in India quite recently. Here are a couple of promotional locks. I took the photograph of the one on the left, and then I saw the one on the right and thought that gives a much better impression of the size of the lock. But unfortunately, I can never go back to rephotograph the one on the left, which looks like a normal size padlock and a miniature lock and key cylinder above it. In fact, it's the other way round. It's a giant padlock. But I can't take another picture because after the locksmith exhibition, which that was displayed, it was stolen, which made the company rather unhappy because these handmade one-off locks take some time to make. They cost about £2,000. And finally, this is the largest working padlock in the world, actually in service, locking the doors of a Sikh temple in India, made by the Trusty Lock Company. And there it is, carried by the owner. And just to make the point about the size of it, that's his son holding the key. If you have been, thank you for watching.